In this tutorial, we introduce you to the wave principle and how to use it in your animations. Let's do it.
TipTut.
The wave principle is one of the key concepts of animation and can be applied to a number of different situations. Sometimes called the beauty curve, the wave principle states that most things don't move in straight lines, but instead move in waves or curves, being pushed back and forth, like an S shape warping into the similar opposite shape, Z. Depending on where the movement is starting, waves move in different ways and can be applied to different scenarios, such as the movement of clothes, hair, or capes, the wagging of a cat's tail, the waving of a flag, the movement of a hand at the end of an arm, the walk cycle of a leg. In this tutorial, we'll take a look at making a basic wave, and then learn how to apply that concept to a flapping piece of fabric, such as a flag. Let's get to it. Okay, so here we are inside of Adobe Animate. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this software because this is more of a tutorial on the principle than the software itself. You can follow along in any software that you feel comfortable with. So I've just got two layers here inside a blank canvas, a guide layer and a wave layer. Now on the guide layer, I'm just going to draw myself some basic guidelines for my wave, just to keep the height consistent and that sort of thing. We're going to give ourselves a little box that we're going to want our wave section in. Okay, just going to lock that off. And on the layer above it, in a different color, let's say red, I'm just going to draw myself a nice long wave that's going to extend outside the boundaries of the box quite a bit. Okay, that looks all right for a guide. This isn't actually going to be our final wave. We're just going to use this as a guideline. Hence why we've drawn it a little bit longer than what we need. Now, let's say, for example, we want this wave to just be like a basic wave in the ocean wafting up and down. Okay. As we spoke about before, essentially by the time this peak reaches the position of this peak, we'll have a perfect loop. Now, it may seem like when you're doing a wave principle that you'll have to choose and animate the wave in quite a difficult manner where it just sort of incrementally grows a little bit and shifts a little bit to the right. What I like to do to keep it simple is to take a layer which has a wave longer than I need, at least for simple waves like this. Just add in a new keyframe, turn on my onion skinning, of course, and just shift my wave a little bit towards the direction I want the movement to be in. Now, because we've got our onion skinning on, it might be useful if we make a wave underneath that has the position of this first wave pasted exactly in place, which we can turn onto a guide layer and lock that away. What this means is when we move our wave along, excuse me, my phone just vibrated there. When we move our wave along, we'll still have that original position to use as a reference point. So I'll just create another keyframe and I'll just move along a little bit more as well, trying to keep the distance between each movement equidistant until we get to a point, a bit easier maybe if we turned on our onion skin settings. Just drag that down from the other screen and just increase these temporarily. Park that over there for now so that we can see a little bit longer. Just try and keep the movement of each of these waves equidistant, using this as a reference. And then by the time our wave meets up again, should be in another couple of frames, we will have ourselves a perfect loop. Now, obviously this looks very rigid at the moment because, well, it is quite rigid. Let's just overshoot it a little bit so we've got plenty to be working with. But you can add some character back into the lines as long as you don't use this same drawing that you've shifted as the final thing. It will look quite characterful. Now, of course, if I turn the onion skin off for a moment, what we have here is a section now which matches up completely within the boundaries of our box with the first frame. So this last frame is actually redundant. We can remove that one because otherwise I'll have a stutter when it comes to our perfect loop. Let's turn on some looping. Take a look at what we've got so far. As you can kind of see, we've kind of got that perfect loop going on. It looks a little bit odd at the moment because we've still got all this extra information. So if I just go through and remove this extra information, you'll start to see what we're talking about this generating point of a wave and how that affects the rest of the wave coming from it. For example, at this point, the point at which the wave is generated constantly moves. Okay, you can see here that on this frame it's generated at the top, whereas the first frame is generated at the bottom. So that'll be basically our halfway point here. Now this works perfectly for waves such as, rolling waves in the ocean or that sort of thing, but it wouldn't really work for a wave such as a dog or a cat's tail, because it doesn't shift about on their butt. The base of it stays in the same point and wafts from there. When you've got something like that, the basic principle is the same. You just have to grow each wave from that specific point. And we'll take a look at that in a minute when we get to animating our flag, because it's the same concept. So I'll just add a layer on top, convert it to a frame by frame animation with the keyframe every other frame. And then I'll just turn this into a guide layer, and I'll hide our original guide. And then you'll be able to see where our growing, oops, I haven't deleted that one. You'll be able to see where our growing wave comes from. If I just delete that, there we go. You'll be able to see here is our basic wave. Now, of course, this looks quite rigid and static at the moment, but if you were to come through with your pen tool and trace the line each time, you'd of course add a little bit of character to it. And you're just using that original copy and pasted wave as a guideline. Obviously, I'm going very quickly here. You'd make sure that your lines are touching each of your guides and it looks correct, and etc., etc. But it's the same principle. Excuse me, that one was way too messy, even for me. Let's get rid of you. It's the same principle regardless of you using the guide layer or not. So you can see there we've got our perfect loop of almost like a waving tail, but it's not got that fixed point of origin. Now you could create that fixed point of origin, and on each frame you would just give yourself a point of origin from here. And then, of course, you would just shrink and grow that first wave point. Sorry, somebody keeps on texting me. And you would just move the origin point so it starts from there each time. But that's something we're going to get onto in this next section. For now, this is a good enough wave for us for a basic concept. So let's save that and move on to our flag principle example. So I've just got 3 layers here: flag, guide, and a pole. The pole layer has just got a pole on it, and the guide is where we're going to draw our guide frame. So let's make this, let's make it green. Now this flag obviously is the same principle, but working with a square or rectangle of material. And the top part of this section is pinned to the flag, so it's not going to be able to move, same as the bottom section. Additionally, our fabric is likely to overlap itself, and it's going to have sections which appear behind and a section that appears in front on each frame. So when it comes to drawing this, we're going to have to compensate for the fact that there is actually fabric behind this where it's kind of folding over on itself. So let's draw ourselves a nice neat guide and use that. Determine the height of your flag and then draw a nice simple wave that overlaps on itself. We're then going to take the top section of this wave, copy and paste it, and just put it as the same position as the bottom of our wave. And then simply join up all of the vertical sections. So this background element here, this line would obviously join up with the fold at the back of this section. The front would join to the front. Back would join to the back, front would join to the front. So that's a pretty much good enough starting point. But what I like to do as well, if it's got more of a complicated wave, is to draw myself a guideline. You could even do it using your line tool. Draw yourself a guideline that just roughly shows where the tops and bottoms of your waves are for each segment. So when you come to drawing, you don't grow and shrink these wildly, if that's an effect that you do want to keep. Just going to grab all of these, everything on this layer, and make sure that it is all green regardless of whether it's a fill or a stroke. And then I'm just going to lock that layer, and I'm going to turn it into a guideline as well. Now on the layer on the top, we're going to take this one section at a time. Let's do it in blue. We're going to take this one section at a time so that we don't overcomplicate it for ourselves, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that the top of our flag waves properly. That will obviously tell us what the bottom of our flag will wave like as well. So remembering, of course, that this is a fixed point, but only this point is fixed. The fabric itself can still waft in the other direction as long as it stays attached to that fixed point, okay? So let's just take our first keyframe here. And for the first one, I'm just going to do something nice and simple, which is just to trace our top segment, okay? Now, even though this overlaps, this wave section in principle is the same thing. It's still just going to shift along down our flag. So what we could do is just add a new keyframe in and then just move our flag a little bit. Now, I'm going to do this a few times until this one peak matches up with the next peak here. And that will give us our perfect loop, or the guide start point for our perfect loop at least. You can see already I'm going to need a few more frames to make this loop perfect. You also might be able to hear good old Phoebe's son in the background there trying to get some snacks from her dinner tower. Sorry about that. My cat is notorious for waking up when I start filming. The final frame, obviously, we're not going to need in the long run. But you'll see already how this peak here has matched it and how this peak here has matched that previous frame as well. Okay, so let's just keep these. Again, we're just going to go through, remove the excess. Remembering, of course, that this is a flapping piece of fabric in the wind. So it is probably going to go above and below your guidelines a little bit. You know, if that's the effect you want, great. If not, just make sure it doesn't go around your guidelines. I'm not too fussed, so therefore I'm not going to change it. So now, of course, we've got the end of our flag working quite well, but we need the start of our flag, obviously, to continue to exist as we move onwards. So let's just zoom in a little bit, move it over so that I'm not covering up because of my annoying left-handedness, and just carry on. Now, this point needs to remain fixed, okay? But the wave at this point is kind of going to start doing that again, yeah? But it can't because it's attached to our flag. So instead, we're just going to give it a little boop. Because remember, the amount of fabric isn't growing or decreasing. It's staying the same. It's just changing direction. What this basically means is you kind of just have to continue the vibe until you reach a flag, which you can kind of see already is going to grow into a sort of circle. Now, at this point, however, if we were to join up that circle, it's going to become too much. And that's just our cue for it to start coming back to the other way. Of course, because essentially our flag is just moving on. Okay, now I may have messed up the timing of that slightly, and I haven't been super following my guidelines, which I put for myself. So let's just fix that both times there. It's easy to get carried away when you're doing these sort of large looping segments. So let's just try removing that. See what that looks like. Good, looks all right. I think we just need another frame in there between, I don't know if we do actually. If we actually include the entire loop. I forgot to stretch my loop when I stretched my frames. So let's see. No, we don't. It's perfect. It's just I'm an idiot and didn't stretch my loop. So you can see how with just a few additional elements, we've started this, this flag on its looping journey. Shifted our frames along, started drawing extra little sections of loops here to bring in, using our guidelines, the extra elements that we need. And we've got ourselves a pretty good loop. That one I think does still go too far. So let's just bring it back in a little bit. Of course, it is going to push itself out in the next frame, but that's okay. Yeah, that looks much nicer. Okay, great. Let's zoom back out and see what we've got. So we've got our top section. Now, this top section is going to be exactly the same as the bottom section, but I'm not going to copy and paste it because you'll see that you don't really need to, and it gives it just a little bit of variation to the flag, which is nice. The next step then, in fact, what we'll do is I will copy these keyframes and move our loop. This is just for the tutorial purposes so that we can see the growth of it. You know, the first one will have the line, the second one will have the vertical lines going down, the third one will be the final thing. So on this segment here, I'm just going to go through, this is the first frame obviously, so I'm just going to go down and match the initial drawing. Again, these guidelines are just guidelines. I kind of like that kind of janky, more natural style to it, so I'm not following them perfectly, but I am sticking to them. You know, when the wave comes up to the top here, it's going to be roughly around this line, and when the wave comes down to the bottom, it's going to be roughly around this line. Okay, I like to leave a little bit of a gap so I can add that curve in, so that when I come to draw the curve, it matches up nicely. And then I imagine it going backwards, and then I draw it coming forwards. And then that just allows me to not have to worry about all these extra guidelines in the next frames. Bring down and bring down. Now the fun bit is just filling in, which adds a nice bit of level of depth to it. Now on the next frame, you can see how this sort of flapping end of the fabric is going to come into play, because it's actually going to have to be just a little bit lower down. This is moved further onwards, which means, of course, this might proceed a little bit lower below the guideline, which is fine. Again, this is shifted. This one has obviously stayed the same. These ones have also stayed the same. Because they're vertical, they've still shifted to the left. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, let's just reduce these onion skins. Oh, they're already back down to 2. Good, perfect. Let's just reduce, I'm going to go through and just add in all the vertical lines first and then go back and do the bottom line, because that's just the way I prefer to work. Just means that I'm taking it one step at a time and only thinking about one thing. When you start to think about multiple things at once, which sometimes you will have to do in obviously more complicated animations, that's where things start to get messy. For example, this flag is kind of being pulled this way, which means it's going to look like it's further down. Okay, which means those bits are probably going to have to go a bit further down. But you don't want to do it too much, because then it will look like your flag is growing and shrinking as opposed to just waving in the wind. Remembering, of course, that as this flag section here kind of turns back on itself, it is going to have a little bit of a hidden fold there at the back. And of course, when this flag turns back on itself, which you don't actually really see in this animation really, if there's any point where this section is flipped all the way over to be kind of pointing like that, instead of what it's currently doing, which is pointing like that, then this section would be dark because it would be that side of the flag. Of course, that really does depend on how you're doing your lighting, if you're even doing lighting. I don't know how to do lighting properly, so I make all of my animations flat until I can learn how to do it properly. Now, at this point, this section of the flag here has started to push past the bit where it's joined to the pole, which is fine. You just need to make sure you account for that when you're drawing your vertical lines, because this is now the fixed section, which means this bit is definitely going to have a little bit where it can see the behind. That looks pretty good. Let's keep on moving. So at this point, the fabric's been pulled past all the way through. Bam. Started to flick back there. If you wanted to, because you can see the little remnant of the bit before it's folded over, you could add just a little bit of a remaining flick. See what it looks like. But of course, because this is such a stylized piece, you might not actually like the way that looks, because it's coming in, bam, bam, and then flicking back out this way. But we'll see, won't we, whether we like it or not. Keep adding the vertical lines in. Now this one, I can already tell needs a bit more of a fold just to give us a clear indication of where the edge of that flag section is. So don't worry if the first thing you draw isn't perfect, you will come through. It's inevitable. You will come through and fix it. If only so you can give yourself that little section that you want. Remembering, of course, that this is a stylized piece. Like so. Okay. Bam, bam. That's definitely facing the wrong way now. Or the other way, not the wrong way. And you can start to see already how this is starting to loop back up and connect with our original drawing. Let's connect that. Vertical sections here, vertical section here. Hidden behind sections, lovely. Bam. And then this one is where the loop becomes really apparent. So this section here has actually gone too far, I can see. We need to bring that back just a touch. Otherwise we're going to get a weird stutter. Just try and put things in the middle of where you drew them before, which can sometimes be difficult, of course. Bam, bam, bam. For example, that kind of stays, the end of the flag there kind of stays too far in the same position. So I might just extend this background bit out. This might look crap, we'll see. And then at this point, it's just stopping curving. And that just adds just a little bit of extra oomph to it when it gets to this section here. It gets to this section here. So you can already see how this is starting to grow, which is nice. So let's go through and with our paint bucket tool, just fill in any of these sections here, which really help with visualizing which way the flag is facing. Won't fill that one because it's probably not closed properly. There we go. And these last two bits. And let's take a look at that loop. Okay, looks pretty good. Quite like that. Nice. So now it's time to add the bottom section in. Let's move over to our other frames here. Now, for this section, it might be easier to turn off the guide and just work from the onion skins, but it's obviously completely up to you. I like to do that just because then I can kind of picture where I'm going and just work a bit more naturally. Imagine, draw. Imagine, draw. And it's important to remember that you're following the guide at the top as well. This line and this line should be relatively similar because it's a rectangle of fabric. Draw, imagine, draw, imagine, draw, imagine. Imagination. Oh, you need imagination when you draw it. This is what happens when you do animation. You go ever so slightly insane. But that's okay. We don't mind. This bit's obviously folded that way, so there's going to be no oomph that way bit. It's all going to be oomph that way bit. So draw, imagine that chunk going back, draw it, imagine that chunk going back, draw it. Nice. Boom. Again, a little bit of a chunk left. So draw it, imagine it, draw it, imagine it, draw it. And then this one we know is going to be pretty similar to here, where this curve is completely gone. So we'll just add in a little bit of an oomph there. And a little bit of an oomph there, and a little bit of an oomph there. Bam. And now we're ready to look at the final thing. Pretty good. Pretty good if I do say so myself. Now, obviously, this is not the final thing. You'd go over this with your ink and your colors and do whatever you want with it, which I'm not going to do in this tutorial because it's just going to be copying it over. What I might do is just do it in a time lapse now so you can see the finished product without all these ugly guidelines. But that is the wave principle. You can apply it to a lot of things, like I said before, cat's tail, walking cycles, the movement of an arm, You know, you can take a complicated piece of fabric that's flapping about everywhere and just apply it to a calm wave, but then add the details of the folded and flapped fabric on top. You know, we can see how this grew from just a single wavy line to overlapping fabrics. Now, if you wanted to, you could add creases onto this flag and just follow that same principle. That principle of the fact that nothing moves erratically or nothing moves in straight lines. It all moves in this kind of wobbly flow. But that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, and if you've enjoyed some of my other tutorials, consider subscribing and ringing the bell. Also, I've just recently added membership to my channel. For a small monthly fee, you can get access to things like unique badges next to your name and shout outs at the end of a tutorial, which you're going to hear in a second. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please consider doing that. It'll help me keep making these videos for a long, long time. Thanks very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm really eager to see what you come up with the wave principle, and I'll see you next time for another episode of TipTut. I'd like to take a moment to thank my level 2 members of the channel. Thank you so much for supporting me and what I do here at TipTut. A heartfelt thank you to both Unknown Ghosts and Win62. You guys are lovely, and I love you. If you'd like to get a shout out at the end of each tutorial video, consider hitting that join button below and becoming part of the TipTut zone. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll see you later.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.